Well, I'm here with Tom Meek. Um, you're not related to Ed Meek, my friend Ed Meek, the poet, are you?
No, but we are friends. And ironically, we've read its events together. And he has a place down in Wellfleet. When we go to Wellfleet, we always have dinner with him one night when we're down there. So it's, yeah, no relation. We went through this whole thing a bunch of times,
Uh,
different weeks. But yeah.
right. But Tom Meek is a writer living in Cambridge. His reviews, essays, criticism, and in the Rumpus, the Boston Globe, Cambridge Day, and others. And he's the member of the Boston Society of Film Critics, teaches at Grub Street and Cambridge Adult Education. Um, well, recently I read this. You did a review of the Tenant, right? Tenet.
Yep.
And you said that you ventured into an actual movie theater. Do you think that was a bit dangerous, or were you feeling uncomfortable, or were there other
Um,
people there?
yeah, well, that's a very interesting question. As a member of the Boston Society of Film Critics, we normally get film screened for us, in advance. And once COVID hit, and a lot of films, James Bond and the Tenet movie, were delayed from summer releases, a lot of us started telling the studios and uh, um, publicity agencies that handle the films that we weren't interested in going into the theaters, even if they reopened until there was a vaccine. The whole thing: is there a vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. And it got really interesting because then they started having. It only happened about a month ago. Cinema only released films. In other words, we would receive a link to review the film, and we had this sort of crisis of consciousness. In other words, would I review a film that I would not go to a movie theater on my own to see it, but yet write a review of it, telling somebody, "Hey, this is a great film. You should go see it." And the only way you can see it is if you go into a place I would never go into. So it's kind of the dicey side there. Some papers like the Boston Globe, they put a writer at the bottom of it, and I know that their critics were for the most part, most of the writers there were like, "I'm not going to the movie theater." So there was a screening of the Tenet. There was a press screening. There were two press screenings of it. I didn't go to either of them because I was down on the Cape. And when I came back, I thought, I'm curious in seeing this film. It's one of the more important films of the season. We vote on films at the end of the season. And I thought, I'm going to go try going to see it. And I spoke to Landmark Cinema, and they said, no more than 25 people in any theater. Our smaller theaters, even less amount of people. In the large theaters, there'll be every other row, no food or drink. And I thought, I'll give it a try. I bought a ticket. I thought I was going to see a lot of people there. I bought a ticket for about a few days after it opened. And when I went to the movie theater, I was the only person there.
Oh, wow.
So
Now, were you nervous at all? No, not really. Or
I would say I was nervous, but after the experience, I was optimistic. But um, I think if the theater was at capacity, that was a very small theater I was in. It's probably about a 30-seat theater anyways. I think had there been more than 10 people in there and anybody in my row, I would have felt uncomfortable because you're in an enclosed environment. There's no, you're in circulated air. There's no outside air coming in. So it
but
does.
was going to say, in reviewing a movie, you've been doing it on Zoom. Is it better when you're actually in the theater? I mean, you don't have an audience in this case.
Well. So when we go to the press screenings, we go in like if I had gone to the press screening and I wasn't here for it, it would be me and I think at the first screening that I had, they only
Yeah.
allowed 5 critics in, and then the next one they allowed something like 20 in. But it was in a movie theater that had something like over 200 seats in it. So there is
Yeah.
that kind of a thing. So.
Yeah.
Um, I've gone to a bar or two since this whole thing happened, and I only go in when it's sparse, and I think I really do think, that Globe's writer, that it's a personal decision whether you're going to go or not. I'm actually glad I went to go see the film because I can now say that I'm now not seeing films.
Okay.
I've gone into the line and I've been tested since going to that screening. I just happened to have a test, happened to have had a test lined up. And so, yeah, I thought the experience was safer and more pleasant than I thought it would be. So,
And how was
yeah.
the movie, by the way?
The movie, Christopher Nolan's this guy who does a lot of
Yeah.
things with time and emotions, and he's and science, and he's very clever and all that. I kind of feel like he lost a sense of character. The main character, uh, David Washington, Denzel's son, plays a very sort of what I feel is his character is sort of James Bond like, is very vacuous, and I think that kind of hurts the film. Uh, there is Robert Pattinson, who plays sort of a boozy version of a washed up spy who also is in cahoots with Washington's character, and he sort of adds some meat to it. There's some great stunts. The cinematography, the production values are massive, but it's definitely a lesser film from Christopher Nolan. I mean, Inception, I think, is more challenging to the mind and more accessible. And I really love Dunkirk. I thought his Dunkirk film was brilliant. I really do.
Now, you write for Cambridge Day, which is a fine online newspaper.
Yep.
It's been around for how many years now? It must be at least 15.
Yeah, I think when it first launched, I think it started around 2005. It started as a online paper thing. I had for a long time been a contributing journalist at the Boston Phoenix, and we know how that went. And then I was a contributor at WBUR, and I guess I still technically do contribute there, but I joined Mark Levy over at the Cambridge Day, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I do film criticism there. But yeah, it's all about digital local journalism that's very microscopic. So it's Mark goes to every Mark, the editor there, he goes to every Cambridge meeting every week, every weekly meeting that the city council has, and writes a report on it. There's another writer over there. She wrote a great article about the changes in mask coverings that are coming to Cambridge now. And we sort of do spread over into Somerville as well. In other words,
well, they call it now. They call it Cambridgeville now. I noticed that they're calling it
Camberville.
Camberville. Yeah.
Camberville.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a cool little thing. I think we're expanding, as journalism in other areas are dying. I mean, being absorbed, and print is kind of really going away. I mean, it used to be it was more prestigious to be in print. Now that I don't think there's any delineation between.
There's a need for these community newspapers. I know I've written for almost 20 years for the Somerville Times. We still do print, but who knows how long that's going to happen.
Yeah,
and
print costs money.
Print costs money, and you wrote for the Phoenix, that great independent newspaper, and the tradition of the Village Voice and all that. Do you think we're ever going to have anything like that again, or a newspaper like that again? I mean, we have one that's kind of small. It's was it the Dig?
Yeah. The Dig is the only one left. I mean, the Phoenix, went under, and then the Improper Bostonian did. However, the Improper Bostonian was always kind of a
I wouldn't say it was like the Phoenix at all.
No. It was kind of more of a lifestyle and an advertisement rag, and something like that. I could see, it fading very quickly. The Phoenix was a great organization, but for better or for worse, I mean, the Village Voice and the Phoenix made the lion's share of their money from their classified ads. And I don't know if I mean, the Village Voice really got into a lot of trouble at one point in time because they had the back pages.
Oh, some porno stuff or something.
It was being used for human trafficking. There's a great documentary called "I Am Jane Doe" that came out about 2 or 3 years ago. I did a piece on this for WBUR, and the woman who directed the film, her name is Mary Mazzio. Actually, she won't say expect specifically where she lives, but she lives out near Babson somewhere. And she's a former Olympic crew rower and Bostonian lawyer turned documentary filmmaker. And she did this documentary on it. And it's a really, really powerful documentary. And it's just heart rendering to hear parents talking about losing their daughters to these illicit trade networks that ran out of the back pages, and also too a lot of people who had written there beforehand who were big writers there, like Tom Robbins, the guy who wrote Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. They chime in about, you know, how disgusted they are, but that's not the paper that they knew. And of course, the Village Voices no longer exist today.
No longer with us.
Yeah.
Now, you let's see. You teach screenplays, screenwriting rather.
Well, actually, not specifically screenwriting. I actually at Grub Street and at CCAE. At CCAE, I teach creative writing, and then at Grub Street, I teach how to construct a film review.
A film review.
Film review,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
And then that's all right. And the other class I teach at Grub Street is using the film narrative to sort of look at the film structure, to look at the structure of A, your short story, or B, your novel that you're working on, if you're having structural issues with your plot. So,
you know, another film critic who I've interviewed, who lives here in Somerville, Dan Kimmel.
Yeah, I know critic. Dan. We're both. Yeah, he's in the Boston Society of Film Critics.
Yeah. As well. So you teach creative writing, you know, and I've done that for years at Endicott College and other places. And you know, if I say to the kids, the one thing if you learn from this is to include detail. Now, what do you say to your students? Are they novices or are they advanced, or I don't know?
Well, that's it's at Cambridge Center for Adult Ed. I teach 2 levels. I teach an introductory class, so they're all. A lot of people come in saying they're novices, but a lot of times I'm also very impressed at some of their skill set that they come in with. And there, you know, you're teaching them things they don't even know that they have a concept of, you know, the 3-act structure and a concept of, you know, the 4 voices and the difference between an author, a narrator, and a character as far as putting slants into the story. So, you know, it's very basic technical stuff like that on the introductory level. Other classes sort of become more of like a workshop kind of a thing. So, and people come into that with, I mean, I had one woman with a PhD in poetics come into my class, which kind of blew me away a little bit, you know, and I've had other people who had their MFAs come on into class because they're just looking to get into a workshop, you know, that has some structure to light a fire underneath them, you know, and being a writer amongst other writers, you tend to get incited by, you know, by talking about the craft of writing, hearing what other people are doing. It's inspirational. Makes, you know, I go to a writer conference or sometimes I teach a class and I walk out of my class. I'm like, I got a great idea for a story.
Yeah, that's what happens. But also, you're a very big bicycle enthusiast. Now, I'm sort of a walker. I walk miles and miles. I get a lot of, you know, I clear my head and I often get a lot of ideas being a walker in the city. And you're a bicyclist in the city. Does that help you with your writing process?
I would say walking does, not cycling. A lot of times I'll go to Fresh Pond and, you know, I just, you know, if I don't put in an audiobook and I'm not thinking about what I've got to do next, a lot of times I find walking very it's
meditative.
Biking's not that way because, well, to be honest with you, you know, walking around Fresh Pond is not like biking through the city. Biking through the city, we don't have, as you know, we recently had a death in Harvard Square. And you really need to be dialed into what's going on around you because nobody else is looking out for you. You know, you barely have some infrastructure. I mean, pedestrians have sidewalks, cars have car lanes, and we kind of have some of these bike lanes here and there. So, until the culture or the infrastructure changes, when I'm on my bicycle, I have never been more aware of anything in my life. I feel like a professional athlete, like a safety for the Patriots, having to look at people's eyes, knowing what's going on behind me and around me. It's just, I don't know how people ride a bike with earphones in. I would never do that. But, it's not illegal and that's their own thing. But, I feel like I have a sixth sense when I'm on my bike. Spent 10
Now,
years on the Cambridge Bike Committee. So,
oh wow, wow. So I was going to say, I read somewhere, I might have confused you with another Meek, but you went to Graham Junior College?
I did
No.
not. I went to,
Oh, okay.
I went
No, I
to,
meant one of your places that you went. I know you went to other institutions. It was a broadcasting school. I don't know if you remember, in Kenmore Square.
oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's why I thought. But you never went to. Where did you go?
I went to, yeah, I went to a small liberal arts school in upstate New York, Hobart College.
Yeah, good school.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, isolated place out in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, it was a pretty good learning institution. I had some great English professors there. I read a lot of interesting stuff that I wouldn't have read otherwise.
Um, and you told me that you had I did too. I used to teach in the South End in this program for kids who were confined by the Department of Youth Services and stuff. And you tell me that you worked at a school for women, girls who are the wards of the state. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, it was really, honestly, it was one of the most humbling and enlightening experiences I've ever had. I did the Big Brother Little Brother program. I had my he was here in Cambridge. I'm from 10 years old. He's now 30 years old, and he went to my wedding. I went to his graduations, and during the whole time, I thought, oh, I'm doing something from somebody else. And throughout the process, I'm like, I'm really getting more. I wonder if I'm not getting more out of this. But for those girls, I was in a class at Grub Street. I'd written something that had done one, I don't know, won something contest or something. And one of the women that was in my class was the vice principal at the school called the Jermaine Lawrence School.
In Arlington, right?
In Arlington, yeah, up
Yeah.
on the hill. It's up, halfway up the giant hill there off to the side. It's a different name now, and I've got a funny little story to end it on. But she said, "Oh, would you come out and teach, a class in whatever, in that sort of what format you did?" I think it was a screenwriting thing I had done, and I said, "Well, sure." She's like, "We'll pay you," and I said, "Oh, I'll just come out and do it for free," because she's like, "No, we have grants." I said, "Well, I really never taught before." And then after I did this a weekend thing, she's like, "One of the girls really liked your class. We'd like to do you to teach them memoir." And I thought, geez, I've never written memoir. And most of these girls, as I went through this thing, was really powerful to learn. It was a very strict environment. Every time I taught a class, and I teach classes to 10-year-olds, or excuse me, probably 13-year-olds, and then different age groups. Every time I taught a class, for the girls that were in my class, there was at least one person in the room for every two girls. And I said one day when I came out of there, I said, why is there somebody like that there? And they said, well, in case they have to be taken down during the class. And I was like, wow. But I never had any incident in my class. And honestly, and the girls really were so eager to reveal themselves and the things they were going through. And they couldn't get on computers. They didn't have access to computers, because a lot of these girls, were former drug users. They had been, I had one class where a lot of girls wrote about, by the age of 16, they had 3 kids, losing their innocence to a brother, an uncle, a grandfather. I mean, that was a very common thing. And we'd share these stories. And honestly, I honestly thought I was going to cry half the time, and tried to, be strong and sort of be focused and be like, well, thank you for sharing that, and sort of talk about the technical merits of that. And it was honestly, for first time teaching, it was kind of a mind blow. But I loved it.
I know. Yeah, I had the same experience, and I was going into Rocks. This was in the '70s. I was going to Roxbury to visit them at their homes, and the students. I was also like a social worker too, and just sort of slice of life that I wasn't exposed to. It was a learning experience. But I was
It's a
going to
very
say,
powerful. It's a very, but I mean, I think
yeah,
that's
go
kind
ahead.
of. Oh no, I think it's a very powerful thing. I think we talk a lot about I don't mean to get political here. We talk a lot about white privilege, and we talk about um, we live in a liberal area, and we talk a lot about doing these things, and we demonstrate and we do all that stuff. But it's really more um, 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 cementing to actually to see something like that. And honestly, not that I was looking to do that, but there is a network of bike delivery people, and they work with the food pantries, and we deliver food throughout. So they show up, they go to, like the Margaret Fuller Center or the Agassiz Neighborhood Community Center, and they get in food pantry work, that's brought in through the city to distribute to the elderly and the people who don't have means. When you go to their house, that's why you're doing delivery, because they're susceptible, elderly, or unable to get there. And you go into play. I mean, you drive by these or bike by, walk by, places that are projects or housing developments. Now you got to get off your bike, get out of your car, and walk in and actually take something to somebody. And it's a very enlightening experience. I
Yeah.
will say that.
Now, you write for the Artery and the WBUR.
I do. I did pretty much as a staff writer for a period of time, but I'm sort of, they've gone through some tough times with COVID and changed things around. I went there and wrote for Ed Siegel, who used to be the longtime arts editor at the Boston Globe.
Cambridge Tab, I think, too.
Yeah, he's been everywhere, but he's now retired. So I went there. A lot of time, and I don't know if you know this. I mean, I'm sure you do, but a lot of times, you have a rapport with one editor, and then you get a change in editors, and things change on that. So editors get you into places you probably wouldn't get in onto your own, and then they have a change of editor in those places, and things change that way.
Yeah.
So they've gone through a lot of change. So I really haven't been that involved with them in the recent past. But
any story that you particularly remember from your Artery?
Yeah, I did do. I did. There was a guy who, I did a lot of film writing there. And first of all, when we started writing at the Artery, when the Artery was created, they didn't do film reviews per se. They only wanted to write about film in a Boston perspective. But at one point in time, I wanted to do a human interest story. I love doing human interest stories. Kind of this is a little bit what you're doing here. And there was a guy who used to stand outside of the bar in Boston called Sansi, still there. And he's a guy probably in his mid to upper 50s, and he's ripped, and he always stands out there in cutoff shorts, and he paints, and he's a very good painter, and he looks a little bit like Fabio. And I always was curious. He'd been there for like 30 years. I was curious what his story was. I stopped by and asked him one day, and weirdly enough, he's a recovering alcoholic, and he was working at a gallery, had just had a major crash, like a relapse, and was in a very bad place. The guy who bought Sansi, Patrick Lyons, it used to be a sushi restaurant over on Newbury Street. Didn't want to have the windows, the big bay windows full of crepe paper, and he was looking for an artist, and he bumped into this one guy in a gallery, and he said, "Will you paint a mural on my windows while I'm redecorating the place?" And after that, he said, "Why don't you stick around and draw portraits of our patrons, and I'll pay you money?" And the guy said, "I don't do that." But they said, "You can stick around outside and be part of the scene." So he's been doing that for 30 years. And it's kind of weird because he's a guy who had crashed, just gotten sober, and he found, like his niche and his purpose in life through a bar, right? A bar and a restaurant. So,
it reminds me of Mr. Butch. Did you remember him?
No.
He used to stand out of the Rathskeller with a big, tall black man with braids, and he had his guitar.
Yeah.
Mr. Butch. I did a story on him.
So
he was an interesting cat. Yeah. But you say you have a short piece.
Yeah.
You'd like to read?
Yeah, I'm just going to pull it up on my iPad here, if that's
okay.
all right. And I might not be looking directly at you, but it's a short story. I was in inspired by an article I'd read in Sports Illustrated, and it was a profile, and that person who wrote the short story, and not at the time I wrote this, would then go on to write a book that would become Friday Night Lights, which then became a movie and a
Well,
TV.
it sounded a lot like a take on how to become a writer. Have you ever read that by Laurie Moore?
No, I think I have a while ago, and that's it. And I'm glad you
And
mentioned
that's the same thing, because she does the same. This is what you have to go through, sort of sarcastic and funny and all that stuff.
Well, I don't know how funny this is, but okay. The title of the short story is called Scrambling. Always wear a condom, even with your girlfriend. Go easy when hazing the freshmen. You never know who will be covering your blind side for the home opener. Never talk back to the coach. Take the cocky shit from the black guys that make you look good when they streak down the field. Never be boastful to reporters. Floss. Always be polite to recruiters. Treat each like they're the first. Never smash the mailbox of any of the businessmen who pay for the Friday Night Lights, and never, ever fuck one of their daughters, like Charles Ray did. He ended up with a busted kneecap and lost his scholarship to College Station. Try to stay in state. Don't go double A. Feed Ma each morning. Wash her sheets if necessary. Make sure Mrs. Vasquez gets her dinner while you're at practice. Call Tilson at the end of the month and remind him to send the money he likes to forget about. Stretch. Hit the weight room before lunch, but don't lose any flexibility in your throwing arm. Slide for first downs. Only dive if the game's on the line. Don't get into fights. Drunken has-beens, jealous wannabes, and jilted boyfriends will always line up to take shots at you. If you're in a fight, take the fucker out quick, but don't break a knuckle. Avoid knives unless you're unlike your tight end whose spleen was skewered by a border hopping wetback. Don't pack. A gun for anything but hunting can land you in a cement box. Cats and jackrabbits are fair game for off-road death race, but dogs and armadillos are off limits no matter how drunk you get. Never fumble a snap from center. Always place the ball firmly in the back's abdomen. Don't get injured. Never pay for a lap dance at the Vixen Den unless it's Daiquiri, aka Charles Ann Travis, the head cheerleader when you were a freshman, because she usually gives you a free complimentary state championship blowjob. Don't stare at Jenny Rogers' tits at the bowling alley. Her brother, a fourth-round pick of the Rams, works at the bar, carries a snub nose, and still thinks she's a virgin. Never let your opponent back in the game. Never lose. 2 losses in a season is a failure. 2 in a row is the apocalypse. It's never happened, and if it does, nothing else will matter. Tell people they've got nothing to worry about when they ask you about the upcoming game with the Fremont Raiders. And even though they'll bring up that fourth quarter interception that gave them the game last year, always outplay your backup in practice. Don't lose your job. Eat at Skippy Jack's Drive-In when Easy Mary Ellen Henning is waitressing. She was the homecoming queen and dated Tilson when he was a starting H-back and throws you a cheeseburger on the house every now and then. Clean Ma up when you get home. Study the playbook. Put Ma to bed. Do your homework. Look in on Ma. Study the playbook some more. Get a good night's sleep. Get bees. Don't get caught cheating. Gas up at Dyson's. The old man lets you fill up for free so he can reminisce about his son who backed you up as on JV, but then dropped out, joined the army, and caught a slug in Iraq. Be grateful to your linemen. Smile to the parents while signing autographs for peewees. Pump fake in the pocket before rolling out. Hope the Horns come through with the full ride scholarship and other bigs that put the squeeze on you. Follow up with Kentucky and Cal and see if they're curious about sending you home every other week. Don't throw over the middle unless you've checked off the safety. Put plenty of touch on the ball when you're leading your speed receivers. Win state. Remember where you came from. Be true to Ma. Get the fuck out of here.
So you're a jock, from what I read about you. Aren't you? A former jock.
Not really. I mean, I did run track and cross country in college, and I was captain of those teams, but I wouldn't say it was a very small school. So
How did you get into the head of this quarterback? You know, he had, who was, you know, his mother was
Yeah.
on the
Well, I love
outside.
sports. I guess, you know, I wouldn't really say I was a typical jock, but I did live, you know, in college. I did live in a fraternity house that was full of football players. I and lacrosse. I mean, the lacrosse and football and hockey teams were in my fraternity house, a good portion of them. And when I did do track and we went on the road, you know, running cross country runners are very different form of athlete than
Yeah, right.
football players or whatever. But when you do track, you know, you're in you know, a lot of the people who were these wide receivers, a lot of people who, you know, a lot of players that were on the football team, shot puts, you know, the big linemen and stuff, and the receivers and running backs are all the sprinters. So it's a very integrated group of people, actually a very diverse group of people, you know, as far as backgrounds and interests go. I mean, so I think that may have led a little something to it. And I always loved football, even though I never played it. I was never big enough. But I always admired sort of its orchestration, and the people that were really good at it, and the people that were, you know, could take that type of a pounding and just keep going.
And later
So,
become demented, unfortunately.
well, there is that, right? The whole
Yeah,
CTE thing is
yeah,
rather
yeah.
unfortunate. But when I read the Sports Illustrated article and I was in the middle of a class, I just kind of, you know, like felt like I dropped from what I had known, the people I lived with. I felt like I dropped into this kid's mind.
That was good. You really inhabited it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much,
Sure.
Tom, for taking time to speak to us on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer.
Great.